I crewed for Captain Miles years ago on the Topsail School at Alexandria, but unbeknownst to him, I've spoken his vessel on her way to Bermuda in the past. I've done a number of ocean voyages as a sail trainer, and I saw you, Captain Miles, and your ship when you were there for an Operation Sail event. It might have been, it was twice. It might have been for the 400th anniversary of Bermuda. Were you there at that time?
I'm not familiar with that date, but we were there in 2009 with a group of tall ships, and again in 2017 with a group of tall ships. So maybe that correlates.
Yeah, I saw you twice, and 2009 was the 400th anniversary of the shipwreck, quote unquote, that then brought British citizens to the island, and that is generally considered the beginning or the founding of Bermuda. And I've already mentioned that we had the fortune of that we were fortunate to have Aaron Roberts talk to us about wooden ships, wooden boats. We're going to hear a lot more. And as you listen to Captain Miles, think about perhaps your visits to the Chesapeake Maritime Museum, maybe the USS Constellation in Baltimore. That gives you a little bit of the taste, because in my view, Captain Miles really, through all of his work and through his vessel, is really a link to the age of sail. And it's a real delight for me to be able to introduce him, because I'm a tall ship sailor myself. To be a little bit more specific, it's nice that he's a local. He's a high school graduate and has been with the Pride of Baltimore since 1981. So this is a real admirable record. When he joined as one of 3 rotating captains on the original Pride of Baltimore, and he was the first to sail the original Pride across the North Atlantic to Europe, and was at the helm of Pride of Baltimore II's maiden voyage, which I, Captain Miles, remember the write-up in the paper very well. Yeah. You did a brave thing there, and sailed her into continuing glory. That was wonderful. And he has done many, many voyages, including in the Pacific. In the Pacific, he has done 3 voyages, and he has traversed the St. Lawrence Seaway more than a dozen times. That is important to remember, because in addition to the seamanship out on the open ocean, that requires additional navigational skills and additional skills and unlimited alertness that he has to demonstrate as a captain. And he was master of numerous tall ships, namely Lady Maryland, the Californian, which I know, Bill of Rights, which I've sailed on, New Way, Alexandria, I've crewed for you, Captain Miles, on that one, Brilliant, Clearwater, Elissa, Oliver Hazard Perry, and Tierra Toporo. And along the way, he has also helped develop model sailing programs for youth at risk. His accomplishments are numerous, but they're worth taking note of, because it tells us what a stellar seaman he is. He was recognized both within and outside of the maritime community. In 2013, for example, Captain Miles was recognized with the Lifetime Achievement Award by Tall Ships America. That's the overarching body of tall ships in the United States. And in September 2005, he was master aboard the Pride of Baltimore II when it suffered a catastrophic dismasting. But the way he handled that incredible misfortune that was so well handled by the crew and his trainees, that they, as a conduct during this event, received the Sail Training International Award uh, and a Special Seamanship Award. Captain Miles was named Sail Trainer of the Year by the American Sail Training Association in 2004. I remember that actually. When you received the award, I was at Lamy at the time on the brigantine Irving Johnson, and for his efforts to shine a positive light on Maryland, he has been named Marylander of the Year by the Maryland Colonial Society in 2001. And I'm sure there are many other awards, but it's more important for us to realize that we have with us a fellow mariner who, as I said before, to me at least, is a link to the age of sail, which is such a wonderful memory for all of us to read about, to hear about, and I'm sure you're going to hear about it now. So, Captain Miles, I believe Bill will now make you a co-host so that you can run your slides, and I believe you have a video. So, yes. Without further ado, shall we start, Bill? Yeah, very good, very good to Captain Miles. Okay, let's get started.
Okay. All right, everyone. Give me a high sign that I'm coming through. Great. All right, swell. So, and good evening, everyone. This has been a great, is a great honor to join you and share some of the facts of operating a historical type in a modern era. So we'll start first with a video. There's no sound, but I think it helps capitalize on the thing that makes this story quite incredible. The Pride of Baltimore is the most recognized American sailing vessel sailing today. It's a world renowned. And this started with the old boat when you consider that when she was lost, the comments of commiseration with the loss, each and every one of them had, you need to do this, you need to get another boat. So the admiration of the type, the adventure, the boldness of expressing Maryland and Baltimore, first with Baltimore, now Maryland, in the way that has been going on, is appreciated everywhere she goes. And of course, it goes with the fact that she goes on her own bottom with a crew that sail her all those miles. So she's she's the most recognized American sailing vessel sailing today. And of course, it all has a bit of a beginning, right? Baltimore, way back when. Some of you may know that the reason why Baltimore became a harbor somewhat after the Hampton Roads area, the Tidewater area, was because of the realization that there was falling water in Baltimore. Mills could be run through the water coming down the Jones Falls. And then, of course, the other factor is that water collected in one part of the North Branch and allowed for sailing vessels to sit in fresh water and kill off the growth of their hulls from salt water. And good water to, of course, fill up. And then the most westerly position of this port among all the American ports north of the southeast eastern coast for transportation to the west and goods going back and forth. But comes a decision by Congress to declare war on England. The mightiest, one of the mightiest naval nations of the day, some would say the mightiest. And it was a bold decision. It had a lot of reason for happening. It was a close vote, only one, majority won. But it allowed, and it was seen as coming for quite some time. So privateering was resurrected, and it's a legal thing. It's civilians who are willing to take the risk to capture an enemy's vessels. They would never go after the Navy. They would only go after cargo vessels. And so you want a fast boat for two reasons. You want to sneak up on a cargo vessel, and you want to run away from the Navy, which are larger vessels and therefore typically faster in any tempestuous situation, but not in the moderate airs, not otherwise in moderate airs. And they captured these Baltimore vessels. The most successful privateers were Baltimore schooners. It's reputed by historians over 40% of all the captures were made by Baltimore schooners, and their iconic appearance made Baltimore a target within the bay. And they were extreme. This is some contemporary art showing them running away. This is art done by Royal Navy people who were chasing privateers down who were busy running away. And I think the one on the left is sort of a demonstration of getting overpowered and needing to shorten down. And it's a real struggle because otherwise they're going to capsize or sail the boat under. But pretty interesting contemporary descriptions of the Baltimore boats of the day. So their origin is of tidewater. Starts way down in the south, but it is augmented by the narrowness of the bay, but particularly the narrowness of the waters. Chesapeake Bay's estuary was the highway. That's how you got around. If remember, this is a land of virgin forests. So the effort to cut a road was significantly greater than it was to build a boat. And so they learned how to ply these waters in hull forms that evolved to take advantage, or rather recognize, the realities of the bay. You don't have a cargo hull making easy turns in narrow rivers under sail of square rig. You need fore and aft rig, you need different hull shapes to take less time. It wasn't that they couldn't sail in bigger, bulkier boats, it just took less time if you didn't use such. So to give you an idea of a contrast of a Baltimore clipper seen on end and a frigate chasing her down, notice the burdensome shape of the frigate versus the V factor, or the sharp high dead rise shape of the privateer, and then look at it from the side. This is something that's often very overlooked. When you look at the black high profile, high dark lines, those are water lines. Those are to give you an idea that those vessels are those drawings rather are sitting on their waterline. They're level with the waterline. Notice the keel of the frigate is equal depth bow to stern, whereas the keel of the Pride is shallow in the bow. Notice also that the ends of the big frigate are relatively vertical, and the ends of the Pride of Baltimore are raked. That means the vessel that is the Pride is a whole lot smaller than she appears underwater than she appears above the water. And that's part of what makes them faster for their size. But the combination of the raked stem and stern post means, and the shallowness in the bow, gives them a smaller turning radius than would be the case if her keel was level. And then, as you saw before in the deep V, she's more easily driven, not pushing a lot of water out of the way. So the combination of all this is where the speed came from. And this is a cruise of the most famous Baltimore privateer, the Chasseur, after the 1812 war. She made a commercial cruise, and she didn't have a big crew. She probably only had 12 to 14 people. During her privateering days, she might have had 80 or 90 people on board. And she went to Asia and came back again, and for almost 20 years held the speed record coming back. Now, they quickly died out as a matter of commerce because of complicated rig, small hull form. But this is a picture of a vessel that could easily be the last surviving Baltimore Clipper style, Baltimore schooner style. And as Baltimore grew over time, it became this hub of transportation, they just sort of a destination and departure point. This is the deep into the inner harbor. It gives you an idea of the technology of transportation on the bay at the time. Later converting to pretty much power. This is Light Street. Upper high to the left a little bit is Federal Hill. You're looking towards the south from the north at the end of the North Cove, North Branch, excuse me. And as time went on, that type of transportation died off, and they were left with decrepit. See this lower left-hand area where there's a pier sticking out? That's crumbling infrastructure, warehouses. What do you do with that? Comes the question. And in the 60s and 70s, what was the question? What do we do? So they made a decision to clean things up completely and start laying in what later became famous for Aurora around as the Inner Harbor. Down here at the very bottom, you'll see the beginnings of the Maryland Science Center being built. I didn't realize that was a building that got started before the World Trade Center, which would be up here in the top of the picture nearly, and Constellation is there. But the marketing geniuses came to Mayor Schaefer and the city council and said, we need to remember our 1812 history, the Baltimore Clipper, and everybody who was a landsman got the idea at the same time. Yes, this is a good idea. So they put out an RFP, 5 proposals were made, and one came out of Annapolis, the American Historical Watercraft Society, founded by Melvin Smith. We brought together a naval architect, Tom Gilmer from Annapolis, and another gentleman with a lot of schooner experience, Fred Hecklinger of Annapolis. And they were the key people of this group, and they won the contract with the city. And this is her day of launching in 1970, early 77. Now you remember the stories of 1976 where tall ship visits from around the world came to help celebrate the country's birthday. They asked the builders in Baltimore, what is this going to be your ambassador? So what was originally going to be sitting in the harbor, winning hearts and minds to change their sense of pride about the city of Baltimore, became this traveling ambassador. And it was quite successful in the first 4 years, but the city realized it needed help doing a better job, and a nonprofit was formed in 1980, and that took off for the next 6 years all over the place, the West Coast and around. This is a scene after she was built. She's sailing. Some of you might recognize this. That's Allied Chemical here in the foreground near the western portions of Fells Point. Now, in the voyages of the first Pride, it finally went to Europe in 1985. 2 captains were part of the rotation. This is an iconic scene, the Rock of Gibraltar, and she was headed to lay over for the winter in Malaga, Spain, and in 1986 she was supposed to continue on through the Mediterranean, but a decision was to send her home because the American flag might attract some undue attention, being that the United States had taken time out to bomb Libya over the winter. So she was on her way home when the tragedy happened in 1986, capsized with very short sail set in a microburst. So fast forward to the second vessel, we have a local artist out of Baltimore who is given some imaginative effort to canvass. This is the Pride of Baltimore II, as seen starting a race in 2009, headed to Charleston. And that photograph was taken from the starting boat, which is a Royal Navy freighter that was on loan. And the same time, the same day, taken from the other side. So I'll ask you to take a look. This picture I enjoy just because it's breathtaking. Well, notice how calm, cool, and collected everybody is on deck. They're just standing there doing stuff. They're not awash. So the power of the Pride of these Baltimore Clippers, as represented by the Pride, pretty impressive. Now here's a video that let's see, where are you? There we go, of activity on deck. And I'm not sure that there'll be any audio. We're tacking, so there's a lot of gear going on up forward of the master at the helm. Let go and haul. They're doing the yards. All the headsails are loose-footed, so there's no self-tacking other than the main boom. The loose-footed fore is the last sail to be brought around. And when you have this much wind, the crew can't do anything at the same time. They have to start to pile up together one sail at a time. And the last sail to come around is the foresail, the loose-footed foresail. It's eased over to the other side. The working tackle has been broken down. A new one has been put on, and then that's hauled in to a point, and then it's given some mechanical advantage. There's a crank haul, as we call it, going on there. So tacking these vessels was not nearly as simple as it later became with modern rigs and what have you. Always the discipline of cleaning up after the fact. So when you're short tacking Pride up and down the bay in a bit of a breeze, you might get 15 minutes on a straightaway, and then you're tacking again because she's fast enough. So the young people that sail her are from all over the United States. They come from the large community of enthusiasts and professionals. Their Pride crew are all paid. And across the country since the mid-60s into this current century, the population of traditional working craft is probably doubled from, say, well, tripled, say, from 30 to over 100.
Will look familiar to you?
So that at the bottom of the picture is a square sail that we set on the fly. It's called the Tgallant. That's been brought down because of increasing wind. And she's at a steady, relatively steady angle of between 15 and 20 degrees. And she's making 11 to 13 knots. And in this case, this was a section of a sail between Charleston and Bermuda during a 2017 tall ship race. A small group of tall ships came out of Charleston and went to Bermuda, and Pride made it in about 3 days, excuse me, 3 days. So part of the conversation is, of course, the rake. There is no historical accounting for why rake until Howard Chappell and the research that was done in the 30s with the Public Works wrote books based on that research and addressed the question of rake, and had to say that there was no primary evidence as to why the rake was used, nor why it was so prevalent around Chesapeake Bay boats, or nor as steep. Here you see 13.5 degrees on the foremast and 15.5 degrees on the mainmast, 2 degrees separation. which is excessive when you're thinking about holding up masts from the wind caught in the sail from behind. By far is excessive. And this is permanent rake. Modern sailors will know that movable rake helps with the performance of the boat, but not permanent is permanent. So what's going on here? And Howard Chappell writes about the interviews with the eldest of the professional mariners of the day, none of which had lived even during the 1812 war, much less during the 1700s, as it was these vessels were developing and refining. And the general opinions fell into three categories. One was cargo handling, one was speed, and one was strength. And you can pretty much dismiss cargo. Speed really doesn't account for things, although Nathaniel Herreshoff used rake a little bit when he was doing different designs to accommodate a loss of sail area for the cruising boat with shorter masts versus the racing boat with vertical higher masts. But strength seems to be where it's at, but that's in the days of not having much standing rigging at all, because what would they have grown first, food or rope? And they would have had virgin forest to pick their spars from, so they could be as stout as they wanted them to be. So you didn't need a lot of rigging, but if you were a little concerned, you might pitch the mast aft a little bit. And then as you got rigging, it becomes a preventer. You just don't need this much for a vessel like this. So it becomes a tradition. And there's a myth. The rake is where the speed is the myth. Air is not as dense as water. So you can put as fast a rig as you want on a barge, you're still going to go barge. You put a slow rig on a thin racing hull, you're going to go thin racing hull fast. So the myth is just one of those strange things we live with, an answer to the curiosity all the time. The rig, again, as depicted with sails, that's a lot of geometry for the crew to understand how to manage and how to sail. And no other schooner in the United States or pretty much Europe has any of this stuff. So we're having to take young, experienced professionals coming from other vessels, and they have to work really, really hard to understand how that geometry works. And on light air days, you can see how it can be used. So several pictures here. That after sail off the leech of the main is called a ringtail. And except for this very ideal circumstance, very light wind condition from aft, it's an otherwise pretty useless sail. And so, like I say, she's the most recognized American sailing vessel around, and she's gone far and wide. Here's a modern rendition of where the privateers have gone. You saw the earlier one where it went to Asia. Well, we went to Asia too, but we took advantage of the Panama. So as far east as Russia and Ukraine, and as far west as East Asia, meaning China, Taiwan, South Korea, Japan, a couple times to the Pacific Northwest. Some of the travel log photos that have been taken. The one on the right is Hong Kong. The one on the left is sailing off Diamond Head in Hawaii. We got two different boats at the Tower Bridge in London. We have some domestic photographs. This one on the left is in Chicago. One on the right is the World Financial Center in New York. This is Istanbul, you'll recognize in the background. And we have been in the Great Lakes this year. We don't go every year, we go every third year. It's stimulated by the National Organization of Sail Training, Tall Ships America, excuse me. Tall Ships America communicates with ports on the various coasts of the United States on various years, and it's an alternating year situation. So this year was the Great Lakes. every 3 years. And a number of ports said yes, they wanted tall ship festivals. So we were chartered, the Pride was chartered to be open to the public and visitation. And so there's a decent amount of money when we do that. So that was much of the itinerary. And so we've also represented Baltimore when visiting vessels have come. This is the Inner Harbor with the Stad Amsterdam, which is a clipper ship. It's a Dutch rendition completed and started sailing in the year 2000 of a clipper ship, a Yankee concept, an American concept that got its roots in the Baltimore Clipper, but didn't actually come around until near the mid 1800s because of the change of construction strength. Pride represents an era where there were no machined fastenings. Everything was rude ironmongery. You might have spikes, but otherwise there were no common threaded fasteners. The clipper ship started to have its prowess because they could bolt things together. And a historical version of it is, of course, the Cutty Sark over in England. I find it interesting that an American creation becomes preserved and memorialized in Europe. But some of the scenes of what is so stunning that makes Maryland so continuously represented by one of the most beautiful vessels in the world. It's part of our history of watercraft. It's unique to anywhere else. Baltimore and Maryland has a unique role in American history with the coming of age story of the 1812 war. So people receive her from all around with a great deal of appreciation for the fact that she's visiting now. This is Bermuda at the end of the Annapolis to Bermuda race that we participated in June this year. And we also have programming that we can share with groups. In this case, we have an instructor helping young people understand about the effect of humanity on the Chesapeake Bay. And this is jumping around. This some of you may recognize this. This is Lunenburg, Nova Scotia. And way off to the left, you can see the Blue Nose 2 at her mooring there. And off to the right is the square rigger Picton Castle. She's the one that's made 7 trips around the world and is getting ready to make trip number 8. So this is a town that we appreciate and appreciates Pride of Baltimore. And going in and around the lakes, you got to go through the various locks. So this is an example of making an approach to a lock. Visiting one of the ports in the lakes, Cleveland. Here's Alpena, Michigan. The vessel ahead of her is one of the Spanish history vessels that has been traveling around. This is the Sault Ste. Marie lock. It's the largest lock of all the locks associated with the St. Lawrence River and the Great Lakes. And this is a saltwater boat that's come up, is on its way up. These locks were made to handle the great big ore carrying vessels, which are too big to go through the Welland Canal. So they're land bound as 1,000-footers. They're land bound. The largest you can bring up through the St. Lawrence and Welland is something on the order of 850. Some of the handsome shots, and of course the tail end of a Laker up there in the upper left corner. So and care, yeah, we got to do a lot of care. And we have, up until the pandemic, we've been able to use a few volunteers. Maybe we'll be able to start that again. And there's an opportunity for anyone who wants to be part of the delivery crew moving the boat from A to B. We have the guest crew program, and that's standing a watch and doing what you feel you're able to do. We don't force anybody to do something that is way beyond their comfort level, but we do ask for the commitment to stand a watch. And of course, there's events. You can represent. We've done weddings, but mostly we're in the business of representing the symbol of what can be done with ingenuity, with persistence, with boldness. And like the other picture, we have programs for 4th grade and for 8th grade. We don't do a lot of them because we partner up with programs that already have relationships with schools. And as anybody who's been following education in the last 30 years, taking kids as a group out of a school and putting them on a bus and taking them somewhere is a budgetary problem. It's a really big challenge. So it's programs we set up, but we don't get used. But between our travels and other challenges, it's not often we get to execute. And of course, general public, go sailing with us, come sailing with us. And general public history stuff. This is like being at a tall ship festival. This is what happens on a warm day. We get the awning set, answer questions. And this is an interesting photograph for the fact that the flag that's being flown is the actual size of the Star Spangled Banner. So it's totally out of scale for Pride, but we thought it was a way of celebrating the 200th anniversary of the declaration of the 1812 war. As you recall, a number of vessels came up to Baltimore in June of 2012. So we're leading a fleet coming up from Norfolk. In the background is the Picton Castle. To the left is the schooner Virginia. To the right is one of the square riggers coming out of the Virginia museum down there. Suddenly forgotten its name. Anyway, and so okay, I'll stop sharing here, and we can go to question and answers.
Thank you very much. This is exciting. And I think Priscilla is now handling the question and answer part of our evening.
Yes, I've got some questions. Lauren, thank you for answering the Sydney Harbor, because we saw on the map that Pride did not get down to Australia. So that kind of took care of that. Somebody astutely asks, and all of us wonder, how close will she point?
Yeah, that's been fun to learn and do. She'll, in ideal conditions, she'll point 40 to 45 degrees on the wind.
Wow.
So she sails to windward with her square. So you saw one of the photographs with her trimmed up sharp. She's done very well in the Chesapeake Bay schooner race with that capability, among other schooners. So the business of going to windward in a square rigger is a mythologically puzzling question, because it's not well understood by Americans. Over in Europe, they understand very well. You can take a square rigger like that Stad Amsterdam, and you can point 50 to 55 degrees on the wind out in the ocean. And those are big boats. They do very, very well. So they're pretty competitive. And of course, in our case, being a smaller vessel, if you get a lumpier sea, then you're not sailing as close to the wind. In fact, for the Annapolis to Bermuda race, we wound up with a leftover ground heavy swell of 10 feet coming from the east, and we just couldn't beat our way into it. So we wound up reaching around it in a motor sailing fashion because we were on a tight timeline. If we were on a slow timeline, we'd have sailed around it, but it would have taken a long time to get to Bermuda with a easterly of 3 or more days and a 10-foot swell coming off that early year tropical this year.
Yeah, I was watching that on the race thing, because I have friends in the yacht club, and we were wondering. We watched you go back. You came down. You went back. We were saying, "What's going on? What's going on?" So,
Well, in light air, it's all about what happens. Those modern vessels that took off, they were a good 6
Yeah.
hours ahead of us. And so they don't have a lot of displacement.
yeah,
Those are essentially, some of the boats were, that lead boat was really a canoe floating on top of the water with fins that kept it from sliding sideways, and had next to no displacement. Some of the Academy boats were somewhat more displating, but still there were canoes with fins on them. And as you saw in the drawings of the presentation, we're clearly a displacement vessel for 91 feet of water line. We're 26 feet of beam, and we're 190 long tons, or more than 440,000 pounds. So it takes a lot of power to push her through the water, even so, and dealing with a big swell. Back in the old days, they would have just, without mechanical power, they would have only sailed as well as they could. And by comparison, modern sailing, particularly when they're boats on the water rather than in the water, are totally outclassed. Boats of this era are totally outclassed.
yeah. Somebody was talking about the Baltimore to Bermuda race, and you said a couple of things, and somebody else asked about how much fuel do you carry and when do you motor versus sail, but you've already said you motor sail when time is short.
Yeah, so we have a mathematical formula that we work with for distance between ports. We use a constant of 110 nautical miles per 24 hours. We account for a fraction of days not moving, such as the day of departure and the day of arrival. We'll also account for a fraction of the mass. So anything over from 0.3 above adds a calendar day. So we then live up to that. That's roughly 110 miles a day is roughly 4.5, 4.6. And so the boat is capable of sailing at more than 200 miles a day. So when we are watching the weather very carefully, we can sail more than, generally speaking, we're sailing, the aggregate of Pride's life is sailing about 70% of the time. Now, short trips, narrow water, there's going to be a dominance of motoring, but the aggregate is we're sailing the boat more than half the time by quite a bit.
70% is good for some of us cruisers, especially in tidal areas where you have to make a tidal gate and there's no wind.
Right.
So,
Oh yeah.
okay. Let's see. How much fuel do you carry?
Oh yeah. So I forgot to answer that question. We're able to dedicate, let's see, not quite 900 gallons to motoring and keeping a reserve for generation. We are a twin screw vessel with feathering propellers, so they're not dragging on the sailing. We're able to run at just less than 5 gallons an hour at a speed of between 5.5 and 7 knots, depending upon a 10-knot breeze on the bow or on the stern. So roughly a week's worth of motoring is capable if we don't push the RPM very high. That speed is at an RPM of 1400. Caterpillar engines are turbocharged, and we're not using the turbocharger at 1400. You have to get up above 1500 to get that, and then of course the consumption goes up faster than the speed goes up. So we have to husband the fuel quite a bit.
It is a sailing vessel. Sounds familiar. I'm sure some of the cruisers out there have made some of the same decisions. Does anybody else have any questions? Open your mic and ask Captain Miles.
Yeah. This is Hans. I had a question in the chat room. I saw your beautiful slides going up the Thames River. One of them seemed to indicate that you were sailing through Tower Bridge. That's not the case, is it?
Both prides have been able to get through through the Tower Bridge and be invited inside. There's a lot of joking around that goes on with that, because not only does it take a near act of God to get permission to go through it,
Yes.
but they say they say that London proper is inside the bridge and not outside the bridge. That's Greater London. It doesn't have that historical connection. But yeah, we were invited with the first Pride of Baltimore in 1985 to spend a period of time at the dock that's associated with the Tower of London. And we had a lot of deck visitation during that time, had a lot of receptions on board by Maryland entities, state, city, and private corporation use of the vessel. The second boat has been in there once, but not for as long a period of time. Otherwise, we're usually in a location just outside that Tower Bridge in a dock situation called St. Catherine's Dock. And as those who are familiar with London, the tidal range in the river is so great that they have to build locked harbors. And so you come in at high water, go out at high water, but otherwise you're impounded inside these harbors by locks.
Yeah.
Yeah. I also noticed your fantastic bright work. Is that a purpose varnish when you ever have an event, or is that part of your maintenance that you briefly referred to?
Well, it's what we do, and it's how we keep the boat. And it would be uncommon in terms of a historical perspective. But again, we're a modern story of a creation that was very entrepreneurial development of marine knowledge. When the Europeans came, they had marine knowledge. It was a matter of adapting that knowledge to the Chesapeake Bay, and then in finding that success, realizing that success could be taken offshore. Anyone who knows the history of Baltimore trade under sail will know that a lot of trade was going down to the Caribbean and back again. And those who know that or read about that will have read about the wind direction. So having maneuverable vessels carrying smaller volumes of cargo was also a factor in the world of security, privateering down in the Caribbean by other nations. During the peacetime years of the United States after Revolution, they had the Stars and Stripes, but who knew what the Stars and Stripes were? Everybody knew the British Duster. Everybody knew that you messed with the British boat, the Royal Navy be coming down on you. And also the islands in the Caribbean were still suffering from the vestiges of piracy. So it could be piracy. So having nimble vessels that were generally faster than expected for other vessels that were needing to stay protected. So other privateers, other pirates might have slower vessels. So it was a way. So in the case of these hull forms and these rigs, we have this history that led to this creation, this knowledge base that slowly evolved, ever recognizing how sharp built is where the speed is. And cargo is valuable and is the reason for operating, but you might sacrifice your cargo quantity because you get the speed. And in the Chesapeake Bay, you can accommodate. You take a boat like the Lady Maryland out of Baltimore, you can put deck cargo on that boat. It's not going to wash overboard in the Chesapeake Bay. The sea just never gets that wild. But you would have a nimble vessel that could spend a lot less time getting between Chestertown and the bay than otherwise a great big bulky vessel would with that windy river, as just an example.
Yeah. I have one more if nobody else has a
Yeah,
question.
yeah, a couple. What do you do about medical issues? Is someone trained to have a medical certification? That's number one. And number two, what type of electronics do you carry for navigation?
So from a medical point of view, there was a time when there was no satellite phone.
Yes, there
Ah.
was.
Well, that takes care of that.
So in that case, we managed through a principle, which was the shortwave radio
Mhm.
and a 3-day managing shock scenario. And we would divert if we had a medical emergency, and we'd have this shortwave radio. Now, today, with the satellite phone, we can have direct medical counsel as whenever we want, and we continue that policy of carrying what is shock management for about 72 hours. So we're not carrying oxygen, we're not carrying intravenous, but we are dealing with able to deal with trauma, and we can divert and rendezvous within a lot less than 72 hours when we're nearer to the coast. But on a really long trip, like the Atlantic, we're working on a principle of responding. And who's trained on board? Well, we have over the last 30 years, there's been an increase in the various trainings that are somewhat equivalent to EMT. You got the wilderness EMT,
Mhm.
and there's a lot of outdoor stuff that does that. So that helps us. And then, of course, because we have the phone, we have a live guidance from ashore. But we're not carrying a doctor. We're only rarely on any long trip. I mean, 3,000 miles to Europe is not that long. We allow for 24 days. We've mostly done it in 17. 5,000 miles between Hawaii and Panama, Panama and Hawaii. We allow for nearly 30. We've done it in 25 or 26. So it's being careful, obviously, first, and then having a strategy that we've conceived that we'll execute. In our case, it's deviate, but we don't try to commit ourselves to carrying the knowledge of and the expertise to go beyond 72 hours of traumatic injury. In terms of navigation gear, it's been evolving. I can remember sailing the old Pride of Baltimore without any anything more than a Loran C. And maybe not even that. I'm trying to think back if she had Loran C when I first went aboard her. And it's evolved over time. We've had DECA on board. We've had Transat on board. We've had, of course, GPS. The electronic charts have come aboard rather than only paper charts. And then, of course, with AIS. And there was a time when the old boat didn't have radar. The second boat has radar. There's a lot of navigation you can do with a radar without worrying about GPS. So it's all pretty basic stuff. Nothing super integrated. I mean, we certainly overlay AIS on our electronic charts. That's much easier to grasp than looking at the actual AIS tabulation. We also integrated onto our radar. That's very good for a radar that has been set up for north-up display, and you can keep from getting a lot of blur on the screen, and you can always have an awareness for your orientation and their aspect when you're looking at them. So now we have all the basic tools and backup system. We make use of the Faraday concept of throwing a handheld GPS inside a steel box in case a lightning strike.
Yeah.
So there's that. Yeah.
Very
How
good.
many on the crew, the typical crew?
Well, we operate the boat with a full-time captain at sea plus 11 seasonal crew. There are 2 full-time captains on staff with the company. My partner, Captain Jeffrey Crosby, has been with us a while. We take turns running the boat. We work together in managing, along with the company, the needs of the vessel and the preparation of the vessel for the mission. But we hire a first mate, a seasonal first mate, second mate, bosun, which is a rigging side of things, but also a junior watch leader. And then we have a deckhand engineer, and then a cook, full-time cook, and 6 deckhands. So it's 12 to manage the public relations part of the mission. So we're having at least 5 on deck to answer to the general public's interests, their safety. And then when we're at sea, we're turning around in 3 watch segments where, the boat going in a straight line, you don't need more than 3 people on a watch. And then we call one of the watches who are on a standby status. They can be asleep. They've already been off watch for 4 hours. They're then on standby, and we'll call the standby if we need any extra physical, but otherwise we try to keep sail change to the change of the watch. You can get all the sail change done that is not emergency based with 5 or 6 people on deck, and the captain's always there. So it's just the 12, and then when we have guest crew on board, they augment the watches, have a maximum of 6. And while most of them average age run between north of 50 and sometimes 80, so their physical prowess is a little less than we might wish for the numbers. They're always a hand because they can steer the boat, they can do something else. And then when we have the younger ones, of course, I love that physical extra power.
Very good. Priscilla, do you have any other questions in the chat room?
I don't see any other questions. I think I've gotten everybody, I think.
I got a quick one for you.
Miles, can I take one more question?
Yeah, I think David had a question down there at the bottom.
Yes,
I
sir.
can hear somebody. Yeah.
Okay, David.
Quick
Go for it.
question. You're turning over the crew regularly, like every year, it sounds like. How do you build a team so quickly to be functional with what could be 12 perfect strangers?
Well, the boat speaks mostly to what is training. The captains will explain the geometry, but these folks are coming aboard already understanding 2 basic things: what the culture is. They've drunk the Kool-Aid. And then the other one is they know that it's a lot of work and it's a lot of listening and following direction. So they come with a will. It's a very much an at-will scenario, and Pride has been attractive because of its ocean-going time. There's not a lot of American sailing vessels that spend time in the ocean. So that's part of their desires, to get that ocean time. It helps with their licensing career. And we don't hire green. We only hire people with previous experience on other traditional vessels, even though they're not similar to Pride. Because with at least a season, if not 2 or more, they've picked up on the business of the amount of work, the lifestyle aboard the boat, the common courtesy requirements, the acceptance of differences in people. And they've also been teaching in the sense that there's typically an educational program they're on. So Lady Maryland and Sigsbee and Baltimore, of Sultan on the Eastern Shore, those crews are enjoying the heck out of sharing with elementary school age and high school age. So they understand the give and take of learning something. And so the teamwork to teach on those other vessels is what they bring with Pride. So we're starting with a group of people who are not unfamiliar
Mhm.
with the basics. What they need to be given time to do is to get a feel of the boat. So that starts with uprig. All this gear that we see on Pride is taken down during the wintertime. That means it has to go back up. We're spending 6 weeks doing that. So there's a lot of familiarization of the ship that's going on while it's not sailing. And then they start sailing, and it's short stuff in the Chesapeake Bay before we go out in the ocean. And so the development process is somewhat synergistic in the sense of the amount of time it takes to get the boat ready, which is getting them ready, and the amount of time they're able to spend on the boat before they're actually tossed out onto the ocean. Part of it's the history, knowing the history. They already come with an understanding of the public interest, and they realize the public are the ones that pay the bill, more or less, support for the Pride. So, the boat cannot earn its keep by doing what it's doing. It only earns its keep because we Marylanders have made a commitment to support the boat, even though it can't pay for itself. So that value system plays into this as well. And quite frankly, unless there's Maryland support for the boat will come to an end. And how do we explain that to ourselves? We've had some good collaboration at the state level of late, and hopefully that will continue. But it's always the question, why can't you do this on your own? Well, it was not a civilian idea. It was a government idea. It started with the city, and then the state jumped in and said, okay, we'll help replace the first boat. So, but they weren't going to run it. It was a nonprofit. And all the other examples, Virginia being a more recent one, but going back to the Spirit of South Massachusetts, to California, they all got started by folks like us who said to government, said, you ought to pay us to do this because it's going to be great. Well, that didn't go. But in the case of Pride, it was a city without even consulting mariners saying this is a good idea. And then going to the mariners and saying, okay, so how do we do it? And so, so as long as there's a deep interest in keeping the Pride sailing, and that's going to have to be financial, both private and public, then we'll have our ambassador. But otherwise, we're going to have to figure out, how do we explain how we lost our pride?
Yeah. Good questions. If there are no other questions, then I would say that, first of all, thank you very much, Captain Miles. And we always have a little thank you token, which will come to you by mail. And it may be Yvonne Brandt, who has been in touch with you originally, who is in England at present. And it's a CAPCA mug. So you will, whenever you have coffee, you'll think of us and this wonderful presentation that we at least consider as really wonderful. And we thank you for that very much. And with that, let's give Captain Miles a hand here. And all the best to you and to Pride. I've always enjoyed seeing her. I've seen her several times at sea, and hopefully that will continue. All the best to you, and thank you for the many, many contributions that you're making to sailing and the sail training tradition. Thank you.
Thank you very much. As an Annapolis high school graduate from 1970, it's just stunning to be sitting here with you in Maryland at this remove. I had no ambition. I had no idea. And of course, all of us are experiencing that. We didn't know what this would turn into, and look at it now. And so it's a responsibility to our followers to keep her going. So by all means, write your legislature and say you really enjoy the Pride.
We'll we'll let them know that we enjoyed your presentation and thereby the Pride as well. So we will do that.
All right.
So with that, I thank you again. Bill has a
Yeah.
word here. Bill,
Yeah,
our Zoom host.
Yeah, just one last word. This whole thing has been recorded and it'll be up on our website within the next day or two. So the legislation can take a look at the presentation if they haven't seen it, and anybody that has missed it. And I'm going to actually stop the recording right now because I'm going to edit some of the stuff out at the
Yeah,
end.
give me 1 second, Bill. One
Sure, go ahead.
last housekeeping comment. Remember, at the beginning, I announced the 2 classes that have been announced to you by Constant Contact. And remember, the annual membership meeting in person. We hope to see you all there. And you have had mailings on that as well, and you will get more. Thank you, Captain Miles. Thank you, everybody. We'll see you for the October meeting. Until then, goodbye.
Good night.
Thanks, everybody.